Hello. Oh, we're so pleased to be here at this really special 10-year on 3% conference, looking back at what's been achieved in the last decade and what still needs to change in the years ahead. And the perspective we can bring to the table is to look at what's changed and what hasn't in marketing and advertising that's being produced today, and if and how that has moved on in the last decade. And by way of background, Jane and I run a market research-based consultancy here in London that specializes just in female audiences. So how they're changing, how to properly understand and to see them, how to diagnose their real needs, and how to connect and communicate with them. And we're also the authors of 3 books on marketing to women. And actually just this year, we've had a new book published on the sort of state of the nation, really, on marketing to women, how it's changed, where it's changed, and where and how it still needs to change further. Now, the book actually contains a huge amount of insight and information because it's really summarizes many of the insights and themes that we have gathered over our 15 years of working in this space. And it also includes and is based on a quantitative study that we did talking to women in 14,000 women, actually, in 14 countries and across 4 continents, as well as a big piece of content analysis that we did looking at sort of 120 biggest brand spenders in different markets, looking at their communication, both on and offline, and products and packaging. So there's a whole lot of insight and material in the book, and we're not going to try to cover it all in the 10 minutes or so that we've got with you, but we're just going to cover actually two themes, really. The first about what hasn't changed in marketing over the last 10 years and still continues to dog efforts and still therefore needs to be addressed. And then second, we're going to look at a theme that we think is really represents really big and significant change for the better and provides inspiration and hope for the next 10 years. So over to Jane, who's going to talk about what hasn't changed.
Thanks, Phil. So the good girl concept is a concept that we introduced in the first part of the book, and we find it immensely helpful as a way of describing the base settings in marketing, which were set way back when, and we feel are still feeding and informing the marketing models and approaches of today. And essentially, the good girl is a series of idealized presentations of women. And when we say idealized, we mean through a male lens. And they're born out of these sort of pictures and identities for women. They're born out of the long-standing secondary position that women have found themselves in, and to a degree still find themselves in today, necessitating that they play roles and behave in a way that's going to secure male approval. So for little girls, it's the idea that in order to be good, they're told they need to be, and this gets cemented by the age of 8, soft-hearted, gentle, meek, emotional, affectionate. For young women, it's the idea that they must focus on developing this perfectionist ideal appearance, one that pleases the male gaze. And then as women age, it's the idea that when women have children, they must be the perfect mom, the domestic goddess, always happy to put themselves second, always throwing themselves wholeheartedly into this role and secondary to everybody else in the family. And for older women, of course, it's the idea that she must make herself as unremarkable as possible to sort of grey herself out, not draw attention because she's no longer useful to her male audience. And marketing has, of course, played this really central role in crystallizing these ideals, making them feel tangible and real, and selling them very hard to women as an aspiration, making them feel like they're achievable despite the fact that they are so perfectionist if only the right products and services were bought. And whilst these sort of ideals began as the sort of 1950s housewife and the sexy girl on the bonnet of the car, we feel that the good girl is still around and pretty prevalent in marketing of today, just in sneakier and harder to point out ways. So the hidden pull of the good girl is what we call it, and she's clearly very strong, very resistant to change, and still highly embedded. And we see the good girl in the fact that only 1 in 10 ads feature a woman over 50, despite the fact that 40% of women are actually over 50. She's there in the fact that men, of course, speak 7 times more than women in advertising. Women have to be passive. Men are the ones taking charge, taking control, the ones who are in control of the discourse and the conversation. She's even there in kind of the even sneakier ways, like in the presentations and the aesthetics of brands and products, where the feminine, the female, is presented as soft, whereas the male is presented as monochromatic and powerful. And she's there when, you know, you see in advertising, and there's so much of this in advertising, isn't there? Women laughing appealingly, pleasingly, but never actually being funny themselves. So in only 3% of ads actually are women being funny themselves, but in many, many, many more ads are they laughing. And she's there in what has become quite implicit criticism. So where the criticism used to be more explicit in advertising, crow's feet, wrinkly skin, telling women that they were too fat, telling women that they didn't look the way that they should in order to be perceived as sexy or appealingly attractive. Now the criticism has become more subversive. So people talk about wellness or clean eating rather than dieting. Or you get a sense that it's about agelessness or rather than anti-aging, sort of coded words for exactly the same message, which is aging is bad, being larger, eating bad foods is bad. And she's there, of course, in the tokenism that we see. It's there when women of color are featured in this tokenistic way. This image is everywhere in marketing now, isn't it? Where you see a sort of lineup of every representation of women mimicking, in fact, the beauty pageants of the past. Women of color are featured, but they're rarely ever given a starring role. And she's there in the fact that advertising, quite often when it's targeting women, the advertising itself can be terribly formulaic and quite dull. Whereas when those same categories, so in this case, baby care advertising, when they're targeting men, out comes the creative toolbox from the cupboard and everything's thrown at it, because of course, assumption being that men are somehow need to be wooed, their attention needs to be grabbed, they've got better things to be thinking about than advertising, so they need humor, they need the big star, they need the literally all singing and all dancing approach, whereas women are given the woman running around after a toddler pack shot. Thank you very much. And then of course, and finally, the good girl is there in the way that masculinity is represented in advertising, because men continue to be presented in a rather unreconstructive way. They're there, they're powerful, they're brooding, they're intelligent, they're looking challengingly into camera rather than purring into it in the way that women are. Men are focused on action, where women, by contrast, are really there just to focus on appearance.
So that's that, in a nutshell, is the stuff that hasn't changed, the good girl ideals and how they continue to appear in marketing in very sneaky, underhand, often sort of ways. They're still strong and very strongly present. But on a more optimistic note, the second theme, what really has changed for the better and what we believe can provide real inspiration and optimism for the future. And the answer and the inspiration lies in a new generation of women-made brands that we're picking up now very strongly in our research, that are all about focusing on righting the wrongs in their market on behalf of the female customers they serve. So they're all about fixing the sexism rather than fixing the women. And there's been this riff, hasn't there, around, particularly in recent years, which comes out of corporate feminism, that says that the answer to inequality is fixing women, that women need to change in order to fit the system. And this has played out in advertising in the form of femvertising or fempowerment messages, which tell women that they need to be braver, that they need to lean in, they need to be more confident about the way they look, that they need to be bolder. But this generation of women-made brands have understood that this is an inadequate answer, telling women how they need to change, putting the onus on the audience to change, telling women to fix themselves. But instead, this new generation of brands set about fixing their categories, sorting out the system itself. And as a result, they're biting chunks out of markets with powerful D2C relationships on that basis. So brands like Third Love, for example, which are developing products that are all about pleasing the wearer rather than the viewer. Now, Victoria's Secrets, as you know, has long been one of the main peddlers and purveyors of the good girl narrative that Jane talked about in all the glory, thin, blonde, smiley, getting to wear the wedding lingerie at the end of the catwalk show if she's thinnest, blondest, smiliest. But Third Love focuses in not on any of that, but on comfort, identifying the need for half cup sizes and presenting women with the product range that fits and feels good rather than it looks good. So brands like Third Love or like Frida Mom that actually tell the truth about motherhood, but more than just telling the truth about it, make some products that demonstrate that they actually understand in granular detail what a nipple feels like in the initial stages of breastfeeding, or what it takes to soothe a postpartum vagina. Stop pretending. They don't pretend like traditional baby care brands do, that it's all blissful and that it's all smooth running and anything less is an aberration or failure. Or some of the a brand like Starling Bank that overturns or sets out to overturn the power relations between brand and customer, putting the power and the information they need into women's hands, not keeping it behind a wall of jargon and intimidation, which is what banking feels like to many women. Or brands like the Girlfriend Collective that feature all kinds of women without making a huge great deal out of it because it's just what women look like. And like the Girlfriend Collective, focus in on the supply chain and checking again the supply chain about and how women get treated there as part of the proposition, because it's very clear that in this age of social media and cancellation, a reckoning is coming where brands that treat women badly in order to provide women with products and services will get called out. So after decades of telling women how they need to fix themselves to be more perfect, be more ideal, or as in recent years, be stronger, be bolder, changing your attitude, the next decade is going to be all about brands, women-made brands probably, that are about fixing the system, not the audience. And you can read more about all those brands and the wonderful things they're doing, as well as other principles and practices that can help develop marketing that makes stronger connections with modern female audiences in Brandsplaining. We'd love you to have a look at the book. We'd love you to, and we'd absolutely love to hear your thoughts and views on it. It's been such a pleasure having these little minutes to introduce our work to you, but we'd love to hear if you've got any examples of sneaky sexism or any of the work that you're doing to try and eliminate those biases in the communications that you're producing. So do get in touch with us if you'd like to discuss any of the themes that we've raised here or raised in Brandsplaining. And thank you very much for listening.